Hello everyone and welcome back to another technical unobtained episode. There is once again a lot of stuff we need to explore in this episode, so let's get right into it. So first of all, I should probably mention that if you haven't watched the last episode, very little of this video is gonna make any sense to you because as you can see I have obtained these usually unobtainable blocks in survival here, which I've done using a very difficult method, and that's explained last episode, and we'll be continuing further using that method, and you kind of need the last episode as a basis for knowledge to understand this episode. So for those who have watched it, let's continue. We're back in this chunk where I have all of these unobtainable blocks here, and as you can see, a lot of stuff has changed around here, and I'll explain that later this very episode, what's the purpose of all this. But first I'm going to explain to you mining Bedrock. So a while ago I have already obtained Bedrock in this world because in a 1.9 snapshot you could obtain the Bedrock item, and I was in that snapshot, and in some beta version you could also get Bedrock, but this is another way to get Bedrock, and I think it's worth mentioning. So how this works is this chunk, in order to obtain those blocks, you had to fill the entire chunk with a lot of block states, so it had to have more than 256 different block states, and then you could obtain those blocks. But this subchunk, which is indicated by the blue lines in the chunk debug, has way less than 256 different block states. So if we use a carpet command, which is used for debugging, we can see that the pallet size here is 74, which is obviously way less than 256. And that means that this chunk is saved in or is in memory using a pallet. So instead of assigning 13 bits to each block, only 5 bits are assigned to this block. So if we check out this block, we can see, it's actually 7 bits per block. We can see the 7 different bits that make up this block. So over here we have the 000 block in this chunk is this air block, and then the first block we have here is this stone block. So that way is the direction in which the blocks get added to the chunk. So this block will be will have the binary ID of 1 if we do a pallet pos info on it. We can see the binary is reversed, so you need to read it from this side, so it will be 00001, meaning it's block ID 1, and then this bedrock will have ID 2, as demonstrated, 0, 1, so it's 2 in binary, or 1, 0, and then this will have ID 3 and ID 4. But what's interesting with these block IDs is that you can combine them, as we've shown before, with the word tearing you can do using asynchronous observer lines. So we want to get Bedrock, so we want to get this 0-1 configuration. And if we look at the powered rail, we get these values. So that's 1, 1, and then this one will be 0, 0, 1. So if we look at this, we want to get 0, 1 because that's Bedrock and we want to obtain Bedrock. And this one is 1, 1, and this one starts out 0, 0, 1. So if we can cut off this first 0 and combine it with this 1, 1, we can get 0, 1, which is Bedrock. So we need to find a position in a chunk where this bit is across two longs, which is this very position over here. So if I do a palette pos info on this, we can see, oh no, it's actually isn't this, it's this position. Because this is where the bedrock will be generated. We can see it's 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0. So this 1 is cut off from this other position. So we can combine this 1, 0, 0, 0 from the power drill with the 0 of the unpowered drill, and then we can generate bedrock. And that's precisely what this setup here does. It places fire over here, and when a player mines a power drill that's behind that fire, first of all the fire will be destroyed, which changes this water into flowing water, which is detected by this observer line, and this is all run on the main thread, and then the main thread powers this rail before it is mined. So it turns unpowered drill into a powered drill, and all the while an async line is updating this same long. So then Bedrock can generate while the main thread has already decided it can mine Bedrock. So let's show you guys that after a quick cut. So now I've just enabled the async line. As you can see, these comparators are pulsing if I right click on them, which means this long over here is getting affected by the async line, so word tearing can occur at this position. So if we try to mine using a silk touch pickaxe over here, we can see we can get bedrock. So after the game has already decided that this block will be instant mined, it turns into bedrock because of the word tearing, and if you use a silk touch pickaxe you can get bedrock items. It's a little unfortunate that the fire is in the way, so you can't directly see it. And also it can generate redstone blocks sometimes, because there's two possible outcomes for how the word tearing can occur. I relogged, so the commands are gone. Because the bits can also combine in the opposite way. Instead of the first bit becoming a 0, the other bits could become the 0, 1. So it would become 1, 0, 1, I guess. Let's check the redstone block. Yes, so it could also combine the bits the other way around, and then you get the redstone block. So that's why there were some redstone blocks lying there. But that's how you can mine bedrock and obtain it that way. And you can easily get bedrock here if you have the item, of course, and you can also get bedrock using the other word tearing method to obtain it in block form. And this way you can get it in item form. So now we need to talk about falling block swaps. Well, what's a falling block swap? A falling block swap contraption is a contraption that allows you to produce falling blocks of types that are not intended to be obtainable in survival. So blocks like end portal frames, barriers, or grass blocks are all blocks that are not intended to fall, like concrete powder or gravel or sand or dragon eggs or anvils are. So we need to talk about sand, and this, by the way, is useful because when you have a falling block of a type of block that's not normally obtainable and it drops on a torch, you can get the item from that falling block. So for example, an end portal frame, if you have a falling block with containing end portal frame data and you drop it on a torch, you can just get the end portal frame. So we need to talk about how sand works, because when sands gets updated while having air, fire, or liquids underneath it, it will either do instant falling behavior or normal falling behavior. And if the instant falling flag is set to true, or if the sand is in lazy chunks, then it will do instant falling. And if it does instant falling behavior, it doesn't turn into a falling block. So on that way, the sand just turns itself to air and then places a block down at the lowest position. So that's the order in which this happens, and this is interesting because dragon eggs will delete this block, so they will replace the stone if they do this. But that's not useful for us because we want to get the falling block entity, so we should make sure that the instant falling flag is off and that the chunks in which we attempt the falling block swap is actually entity processing, because otherwise the block will do the instant falling behavior. So when normal falling behavior is done, it will check what block is at its own position, and this will usually be sand because sand is the only falling block, and it will then create an entity of this type. And the sand block is not yet deleted, so if the sand block is updated multiple times, it will actually create multiple sand entities, multiple falling block entities. But when the falling sand entities get processed for the first time, it checks if the block at its own position is its own block. So this is a falling sand entity containing sand data. Then it will check, is the block I'm in sand? It is sand, and then it deletes this block. And then when the next entity gets processed, it checks, is my block sand? And then this sand block will have become air because of this falling sand entity, and then all the following falling sand entities get deleted. So if a sand starts executing code for normal falling on one thread and then is replaced on another thread by a different block during a very specific time window, then we can create a falling block entity of another block, so not sand or gravel. So it's the block is changed, and then we can get an entity of, for example, a falling end portal frame. And then that entity will delete the end portal frame too, which is important. So I said before that there is a very specific time window in which the falling block needs to be changed to, for example, an end portal frame or nether portal in order to obtain such a falling block. And that's shown in this code tree here. You can see that this in this piece of code there is a check whether the block at the updated position is sand, and then if it is sand, then the falling block code, which is over here, will be run. And in that falling block code there is another check for which block is at that position, and then the block at the position will be made into an entity. So we need to change the sand block into our desired block, so our end portal frame, for example, in between. So after this code has been run and before this code is run, because then it's sand here and it's an end portal here, and then we can get a falling end portal like that. So now I'm going to show you guys the Nether portal contraption. How it works is that we have the async line pulsing here, which when the main thread powers this dropper here, the dispenser is budded, and then the main thread also lags itself a bit here due to these observers. So the async thread has some time to actually activate this dropper, and then it starts placing the portal. And after this portal block here has been placed, lag is created on the async thread with these observers, and then the main thread is updating sand, which is actually here, and then this calls a race condition, which I've explained, that can make the Nether portal drop as a falling block. But the thing is, the chances of this thing actually working are pretty low. So it takes a long time. So let's see if we can get one here. Okay, so we actually got one, but it took a bunch of tries. So I had about a full stack of sand. So it took like 60 tries to get one, and it's quite random. So we actually need to improve these chances. So I showed us getting falling nether portals in the last clip. As you can see, they have the entity bounding box, and that might not seem so interesting because you can just build a portal everywhere, right? Well, no, because in the end you can't build a nether portal, it doesn't work. But if you have a falling nether portal, you can actually get it to place down in the end. And you can make these roads using wither skeleton skulls, and you can move them around using fishing rods. And you can actually go through these into the nether. And now I'm in the nether. But it's this nether I'm in right now is a pretty weird condition because some entity things don't work well. So I can't use firework rockets. So that's pretty weird. So as you just saw, it took a lot of attempts to actually get a falling nether portal. So we actually need to look back at the code in order to check if we can actually improve our chances. Because as I said, if in between this line of code and this line of code the block is changed, then a falling block swap occurs. So if we make the period of time in between this line of code and this line of code, if we make that take longer, so if we slow down the code here, then we can actually get the falling block swap to happen more reliably, because the async thread places the nether portal into the position where we have sand placed by the main thread. So if we slow down this code, then there is more time for the async thread to place down that nether portal, and if it places it down, there is a higher chance that it happens in between these lines of code. So when you look at this code, there isn't really that much you can change, because in this line of code is all of this code will happen essentially instantly, and then this code only checks if the position below the sand block is an air block or something it can fall through. And then we have this check. It checks whether or not the instant falling flag is on, and if the chunk is entity processing. So the position in all directions minus 32, and then plus 32 in all directions, it checks if those chunks are loaded. So we can actually try and slow down the check for whether or not a chunk is loaded. And we need to do that using clustering, but I'll first show a diagram in which these chunks are shown more clearly. So to show what I mean, I've created this very simple diagram. So essentially all of these squares are chunks, and in the center you have the chunk with the sand block that's checking whether it needs to instant fall or not, and it does that by checking if the area 505 area centered on itself is loaded, because it does this check if negative 32 in the Z direction and negative 32 in the X direction is loaded, and then it iterates through all the chunks until it reaches positive 32X, positive 32Z. So it checks all of these 25 chunks, including its own chunk, whether they are loaded or not. So if we can somehow slow down the check in the code for whether a chunk is loaded or not, we can also slow down the sand code at the correct time. So how does the game actually find loaded chunks? Well, it turns out there is actually a big list of chunks that are loaded. So in this list you have an index value in the top left here, and this key value, which is very important, and then the X and Z value of the chunk, and then the hash of the chunk. This clustering value doesn't actually exist in the list, but it is important later, because when the game tries to find a chunk, it uses the X and Z coordinates to calculate its index in a list. So this index is related to the X and Z coordinates of the chunk. And when it finds this index, it starts looking in the list, and this index that it finds is the hash. So chunk negative 244, negative 34 has the hash value of 5, and that's why it's at the index 5 in this list. So the game tries to look at position 5 in the list, and then it instantly finds this chunk if this chunk is being looked up for some reason. So what also can happen is what you see down here in the list. Multiple chunks can actually have the same hash value, and when that happens, the chunk gets put down a bit further. So as you can see, the index 22 and index 23 are both already taken, and when this negative 243, negative 16 chunk came along and tried to insert itself into the list, it found this position. Oh, this is filled. I can't put myself here. And this is filled. Okay, can't go there. And then 24. So chunk with hash 22 is actually at the 24 position. So how does this chunk get found when the game tries to look it up? Well, same thing. The game knows the chunk's coordinates it's looking for, and it knows its hash value. So it starts, if this chunk is being looked for, it starts looking here, and then it checks, is this the chunk I'm looking for? Well, no, this isn't the negative 243 I'm looking for. And then it goes to the next value in the list, 23, and it starts looking here, and no, that isn't correct. And then third time's the charm, it actually finds the correct chunk here. But what can actually happen is if we deliberately load a lot of chunks that actually have close hash values, we can make the distance the game has to search for very large, and that obviously makes the check take a long time because it has to iterate through a bunch of different numbers. So that's what this clustering value is. This clustering value is just the index of the chunk minus the hash value. So as you can see, 24 minus 22 equals 2. So that's the distance from the position it should be. So this should be distance 1, and this is distance 2 from the 22 it should be. So this is actually already a calibrated list. So if I go down a lot, you can see this here. This is a bunch of chunks that are loaded, and as you can see, all of these positions in the list are completely filled up. So the thing here is, if there is some chunk with hash 5794 that tries to insert itself into the list and it has to move very far down, because it's that far away. So the cluster begins at some value. Okay, yes, so 4500. If a chunk with index 4581 or a bit later tries to insert itself into the list, it finds all of these chunks are in the way. So it has to move all the way down, and if we scroll down very far, you can see that a lot of these chunks start having very, very high clustering values. So if a block is edited in this chunk, then the chunk is looked up, but then the game starts looking at position 5400, and it has to go down through all of these chunks before it actually finds this chunk at position 7600. So it's very well, not very laggy. It doesn't take that much time, but compared to how much time the game would take to do the check, it's very large. So we really enlarge the amount of time that the Nether portal can get placed if we have these chunks clustered like this, if they are clustered. Also, one thing I want to mention is that you can actually get this list by typing the command /loaded chunks dump if you have the carpet mod installed. So when you type this command, this list gets added to a file in your server folder. And another interesting thing is if you use Excel, you can use these X and Z and clustering values, and you can generate a pivot table using that. And then you can actually, kind of like a map, see the coordinates of the chunk and its clustering values. So all of these positions here are actually currently loaded. So all of these zeros are loaded chunks that have a clustering of 0. So all of those numbers are the clustering values. And if we look over here, this is an area. And this chunk here is a very good position to try and attempt a falling block swap in. Because if you look in the 5x5 of chunks here, let me zoom in a bit, you can see that on these edges here, these numbers are all very high. So this center chunk, if we attempt a falling block swap here, it first tries to check this chunk if it's loaded or not. And well, this chunk it finds very fast because this has a clustering value of 0. So it finds it immediately, and this one too, and this one too. But this one, it has to search 1150 different chunks, and this one 2000, and this one 600, and then these ones are easy again, but then this, all of this adds up together, of course. So it's very it has to look through the list almost 20,000 positions in order to find all of the chunks here. Also, there is one more very important point with the clustering, and that is actually this line of code, because we don't want to slow down this code. We want this code to be processed as fast as possible, and this code is for the scheduled updates are immediate, so for the InstantTileTick stuff. InstantTileTicks do not get processed if within 8 blocks of them there is an unloaded chunk. So that's this check here. If the area is loaded in the negative directions, 8 blocks, and 8 blocks into the positive directions, only then does the stuff actually get processed. Otherwise it doesn't. And this check is another isAreaLoaded check. So if we cluster this actually gets influenced too, and this is most apparent with the async lines, because the async lines need to be processed as fast as possible. So it's very important that within 8 blocks of an async line, we try to keep the clustered chunks away. So there shouldn't be any clustered, heavily clustered chunks within 8 blocks of an async line, because that will slow down the creation of falling blocks, and that will mean that our chances of getting a falling block swap actually become lower again. So I'll show a diagram for that. So here we have the chunk diagram again. This center chunk is the chunk with the sand, and then we have these this 5 by 5 of chunks. So if we now have the async lines on a corner like this here, so in my contraption the async lines are kind of centered on this corner, and they don't go past half of the chunk. So the position within the chunk therein also matters, because it is just all chunks within 8 blocks of an async line need to be non-clustered. So these light blue chunks, if those are clustered, it's actually bad. And all of these green chunks, if they are clustered, it's all beneficial, because then the sand code is slowed down without the async lines being slowed down, because their check for 8 blocks away is being slowed down. So the most pressing question right now is probably what a cluster actually looks like in game, and that's what this yellow line lever is for, because this lever here goes towards a cluster, and I can actually look at it on my minimap, and as you can see, a cluster is very large. So this is where I'm currently standing, and then if this is the edge of my render distance, so that's all the way over there. And if we look, it's much larger than one render distance, so it actually goes all the way over here. And what is it actually? Well, it's just chunks with hoppers and chests, because if a chest is on a chunk border in 1.12, it loads a chunk next to it, and then it can load the chunks in a pattern like this. So we can actually try loading the cluster now, and I should spawn in some players, or well, yeah, it doesn't matter. Let's just load it, and we can see it loading on the chunk debug. As you can see, it's a tree cluster, so it doesn't ever load a 5 by 5 of chunks anywhere, so it doesn't make chunks entity processing, because that's problematic for chunk unloading. And if we wait a couple of seconds, some chunks in between here will unload, because they're not important for the clustering. So if we would now go over to the async setup, it would actually be very slow, because I didn't preload the 2x2 of chunks over here. Which is important, because if I don't do that, then the wrong chunks are clustered and the sand code is slowed down in the wrong location. So that's actually not beneficial. And these chunks continuously stay loaded because of the perma-loader, which is over here close to my spawn chunks. So I should now restart the server in order to unload these chunks, and then I can preload this 2x2 and actually load the cluster in order to do some falling block swaps. So as you guys can see, I have started up the async line. It's pulsing, and then I've also started up the cluster. So if I place sand now, the chances first try, and again, the chances are very high, because the cluster is I have a very large cluster. This chunk is like clustered with 20,000 cluster chunks. So that's pretty good, and then you can take your folding Nether Portals and go to the end with them. Also, they don't actually drop any items, unfortunately, so they place as blocks, but don't drop items, so you need the falling block form. So I mentioned at the start of the video that I would kind of explain what's going on in all of these chunks here, and I don't think I'll get to most of it this episode, but I can explain some things. Most of these things are just like kind of small helpful things. So after you stop an async line, it's actually there is a ton of observers that are in the on state, and the only way to fix that is to mine them manually and place them back, or to push them using pistons, and then they turn back into the regular unpowered observers because they schedule TileTick on themselves. So that's what these piston lines things are for, because they just push and pull the observers back and forth in order to redo them. And this repeater line is where the async line comes in. And this lever is essentially the same thing as these async observer line reloaders, because within this repeater line there is actually a bunch of locations with these little observer stations, because I feel like they sometimes the async line can update suppress if too many repeaters are after each other without any observers in between. So you can see these observers, for example, are stuck in the on state, and if I now flick this lever, the observers are retracted and then they turn back into the normal state. And when I push them back, these repeaters will also be updated. And then all of these repeaters will unpower. Okay. And then we have more async lines over here, and these are actually two async lines, because it's for the thing I'll show next episode, you actually need two async lines running simultaneously, and that's just these slime blocks are for that mainly. So yeah, so we didn't quite get into everything this episode, so that only means that the next episode will be even more interesting. So if you want to watch that episode, you should like this video and subscribe for the next one. Have a great day, everyone. Bye bye.